What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh! Video, and in this video I'm going to be going through a deck that I featured on the channel in the past in a bit of a different form, and that's Gearfried. So I featured this deck on the past in my video where I tested out the two topping lists from previous tournaments, but I had some major complaints with the build of that deck. For instance, I didn't like things like Magic Drain, Mirror Wall was kind of iffy as well. So I mixed up the deck a little bit. I think I've made some positive changes. I think some of the changes are a bit, debatable. You can sort of decide on that after you watch the video and, talk about how you'd build the deck in the comments down below. But I'm decently happy with this list. After playing some games with it, there are some things that I would change. For instance, I would definitely add a Torrential Tribute. The reason I didn't beforehand is just because there's a lot of traps in this deck already, so it didn't really seem like there was much space for it. But I think you could definitely replace something like a Fisher or maybe even a Nobleman with a Torrential Tribute. As, I kept these in here as they were in the original Alafia 2 list, and, they had success with the deck, so I figured they might be pretty good here, but I think that TT is just better than Fisher in general here. Just as a form of protection, you can get proactive with what you're destroying, and so I like that. But yeah, so this is the list that I've got, and I think that it's got some pretty interesting things to note. The Hot S is also maybe a debatable conclusion here, but I like the Hot S because I actually included a Change of Heart and a Snatch Steal here, although Snatch Steal might have been in the original list, but I included a Change of Heart here, so I figured having a Tribute Monster to pair with these would be pretty good. Also, I figured this can allow us to get over things like Sangan, Witch, Serpent, things that can be really annoying. I think that Hot S is a pretty good option to go for here. And you don't want to play Jinzo in this deck because it shuts down like your Blast with Chains, which is obviously not the best. So I went with Dark Ruler here, and you'll see in the games how this played out. I do think it's a decent card, but it didn't really have the best showing in the games that I played. So maybe there's a card to take out in the future. For the other cards here, we've got Double Dawn to Luke. We got Triple Gearfried as the main combo in this deck. As you summon out Gearfried, equip it with Blast with Chain pops itself, and then you destroy a card on field. And we've also got an Exiled Force to round out our Warrior package here. We've also got double Reinforcing the Army to search out these Warriors. And you'll also notice in the side deck, we've got a Sasuke Samurai and a Zambira the Dark. Now, I'm pretty sure Zambira was mained in the past iteration in this list. I don't really like it in the main deck. I think that there are, a lot of things it doesn't do super well against. I think in a more beater-dominated meta, Zambira is very good. So if you're facing something like a Gearfried deck, then this is good to bring in the mirror match, I think. But against hand control, I find it a little bit underwhelming, and also you can't press for damage with it if you do need to get really aggressive. I also included the Sasuke here as this is good against flip focus decks, of which there are quite a number of them. And so I figured I'd test it out, and you'll see how it potentially went in the games. Now, outside of the Warriors, we've also got a Fiber Jar here. Now, this is a bit of a defensive card, which may seem weird in a deck that's trying to get really aggressive. But the reason I have this here is that, you'll likely be doing a lot of damage to your opponent. And in order to do that damage, you do need to go a bit lower on resources. And if you're facing something like hand control, you'll be even lower on resources. So I figure Fiber Jar is a good way to reset the game state. If you've done more damage to your opponent, then you are in sort of the advantageous position after a Fiber Jar goes off. So I figured it's all around good for the deck, and it also is just sort of like an emergency out in case you do need it. We do have a Witch of Black Forest in here to search it. We're not playing a Sangan, as Sangan doesn't really search too much of our deck. It searches out the Zalugs, the Exiled, the Fiber, and the Lily, as well as the Witch, I guess. But the Zalugs and the Exiled are searched by Rhoda, and I mean, Witch also searches Fiber Jar and Lily. So I think that it's ultimately fine to just go with Witch, and that is something that Alafia 2 did in their original build. So I like that feature of the deck. Also, we've got Injection Fairy Lily here, insane card to get a lot of damage in. We've got a King Tiger Wang Hu. This is a bit of an interesting inclusion. The reason it's in here is because it does really well against things like Mystic Tomatoes and the like, and you can search it with Witch if you do need to get rid of those. Maybe it's unnecessary given we've got the Gearfrieds and Blast with Chains as well as the Exiled Force here, but I do like Wang Hu as a very interesting card. It also stops things like Lily and Exiled as well. So I mean, you could definitely replace this with another beater, but I do like Wang Hu in this deck, and you may see this come up in the future. Now, we've also got Gemini Elves to round out our beater package. I think that this is a very good inclusion here. And we don't play Kaiku or Bazoo. I think you could maybe include those in the side. But with Kaiku, we've already got enough 1800 beaters, and I think the Kaiku's effect is a little bit underwhelming in this format. And with Bazoo, you're not playing enough monsters to really support it. Although it could potentially be a good search-off witch just to pop like an opponent's Jinzo. But I feel like, if anything, that would be a side deck card, probably. For the spells, we've got Change of Heart, Confiscation, Darkhold, Delinquent Duo, a Fisher. I probably would cut this in the future, but I do think it's an interesting inclusion, so I did want to test it out because LFU2 was on this. We've also got a Graceful Charity, a Harpy's Feather Duster, a Mirage of Nightmare, Monster Reborn, triple MST, one Nobleman of Crossout. You could potentially put this in the side, but it does allow us to get more aggressive, so that's why it's in here at one copy. I think in the future I might take out the Nobleman and the Fisher for Torrential Tributes and just put the Nobleman in the side, replacing the Fisher in the side. We've also got a Pot of Greed, Raigeki, double Reinforcement the Army, which I mentioned earlier, Snap Steal, and Forceless Sentry. For the traps, we've got Triple Blast with Chain, Call of the Haunted, Imperial Order, Mirror Force, and Ring of Destruction. Now, as I mentioned in the future, I would go for Torrential Tributes here as well, as Torrential is just such a powerful trap in this format and can shut down things like the Yata Lock. But I didn't put them in this iteration of the deck, and that may cost us. For the side deck, we've got triple Gravekeepers Spy. This was inclusion in Alpha 2's list as well, and I liked it, and I figured it could be good to test. Against more aggressive decks, this can help you wall up. You got a Jinzo here against more trap-focused decks. Double King Tiger Wanghu in case our opponent's on like a recruiter control strategy. Sasuke Samurai and Zambara, as I mentioned earlier. Sinister Serpent, this can be good against hand control, both as a card that they discard and it's not really that bad for you, and as a card to break the Yata Lock. We've got a Yata here in case we feel like we can go for the Yata Lock ourselves. We've got a Book of Moon. This can potentially be good against aggressive strategies, as well as if you side in something like Sasuke Samurai. This might see some play. I am kind of curious about that strategy of maybe playing more Book of Moons, playing more Sasuke Samurai, seeing what happens. But that would be something to test at a future date, probably. The Fisher here, again, I think the Fisher is not the best here, so I'll probably take it on the future. We've got a Heavy Storm against more back row focused decks, another Nobleman, and a Dust Tornado, again against more back row focused decks. Fusion deck isn't anything important. We're never going into this. But yeah, that is the deck. And I think that this deck is a pretty interesting one. I think there are a lot of ways that you can build Gearfried, and I think that this deck is definitely not optimized. So I encourage people watching this video who are interested in the deck to tinker with it more and, try it out for themselves. But without further ado, let's dive into the games and see how this deck actually plays. Could we get some games against Soul65, a frequent guest on the channel, and someone who's been tinkering a lot in Yata format, so it's always cool to play them. We throw rock, they throw paper, so we are going to be going second here, unfortunately. And, I mean, let's hope that they don't have anything too good in their opener. This would have been a good opener with the Comfy there, but we can Comfy them next turn, potentially, if they don't have a hand rip here. They're going to fire Painful, which is pretty rough for us. They're going to send a bunch here, but, I mean, we just give them Serpent. Like, whenever Serpent gets sent, there's no real reason not to give your opponent the Serpent, because, like, if you give them a more powerful card, right, they could potentially use that. And if they've got Graceful Charity anyways, like, they might choose to keep the more powerful card because it might actually be advantageous for them. So, like, yes, they're getting a free discard off of Graceful, but they'd be getting the Serpent back next turn anyways, so it doesn't really matter. Unless you've got Kaiku. If you've got Kaiku, that changes the situation a bit. But in general, it's just better to give your opponent Serpent. So, I'm really not a fan of sending Serpent off Painful, as I've expressed in the past, but it is something that people do, and they do have the Graceful, so I guess it does make sense. They're also on Cold Wave, very interesting card here. We'll have to see if that actually does pay off for them. We draw a Snatch Steal. We're just going to run out of Gemini Elf attack into their set. We could have, like, Raigeki and gone for Zayluke here, but I think that's a little bit greedy, so I didn't want to do it. Unfortunately, we do get a little bit punished for this, as it is a Gravekeeper's Spy, so our opponent will be able to bring out another Spy, but we do have the Raigeki for later, so it's not all that bad. We're going to fire a Comfy now, just see what they've got here. It looks like they've got a really good hand. This is actually kind of frightening. I think we do have to just take the change, as if we give them change, they can get in for a lot of damage. I'm not sure we can really afford that. Yeah, it's a bit of an awkward spot, but yeah, we do take the change out of their hand. Also, they can use change to tribute out Hades as well. We do have the Raigeki for the crackback, but, like, if they've got the Reborn to bring back one of our monsters, then that would be pretty bad for us. We'd be at a pretty low life total. So we do Comfy. We're going to set this Snatch, pass back to our opponent. We could have potentially Harpied, but I didn't really see the need to. Our opponent's going to fire a Cold Wave here, which is a bit scary. We did know about that. But yeah, they're going to attack in to our Gemini Elf with the Hades. pass back to us. We draw Exiled Force, which is the perfect out to that. I mean, our other play would have been probably to set Zalug, which would have been really bad. But luckily, Exiled Force does out Hades in a way that gets around Cold Wave. Our opponent is just going to pass back to us. We draw a Gearfried here, which is pretty good. We're going to Snatch Steal our opponent's Spy, summon out the Zalug, just get in for damage. Now, we could have potentially gone for a Harpy's Feather Duster here, but I didn't really feel the need to, because if it was like MST, then that'd be really bad for us, very punishing. But the fact that they didn't fire MST in battle means that I don't really think it did much there, and it looks like they've got an MST in hand, so I feel very good about this. I don't think we need to actually fire the Harpies yet, because I think their back row is just a bluff. So I feel pretty good about this game state. Our opponent will gain 1,000 here, which is unfortunate as we do want to get aggressive, but we've got sort of the upper hand in terms of advantage. Our opponent can Monster Reborn back a monster as well, which is unfortunate, but like I still feel very good about this situation. Our opponent's going to add back that Sinister Serpent, and let's see what they do now. They're going to fire a Snatch Steal on our Dawn, so maybe we should have fired the Harpies, because that would have actually dealt with the Snatch Steal. Although there aren't really many ways to predict a set Snatch Steal, so yeah, I wanted to save the Harpies for a bit better of a situation. Unfortunately, this will get to rip a card out of our hand, and unfortunately it is Harpies. Harpies would have been really good here. We could have Harpied the Snatch Steal and then gotten our Zalug back, so that's kind of unfortunate. And now that they know Harpies is gone, they're just going to set a bunch. Makes sense. We're going to gain 1,000 here. We're going to summon out Gearfried. That's fine by them. We're just going to try and hit into the Zalug here, try and bait out something. They've got a ring. I'll pop the Gearfried. And now we can just fire Raigeki in main phase 2, and I feel very good about that. We hit a Witch, which is great. So now we know the last card in hand is Serpent, I believe. Yeah, the last card in hand is Serpent. Set is Monster Reborn. Kind of a scary situation. Our opponent can Reborn back the Zalug, but we kind of had to Raigeki here either way. So yeah, our opponent's going to bring out a Kaiku, Reborn back that Zalug, and now we lose our Injection Fairy Lily. Again, not really much else we could have done here, but, you know, it is what it is. We just got to hope for a good draw off the top. And Mirror Force is a pretty great draw. They're going to draw one. They're going to think about what to do here exactly, and they're just going to attack in with the Kaiku. We've got the Mirror Force here, popping both their monsters. They're going to set one pass back to us. Now, that might be a Serpent, but either way, I mean, we've got to set this Blast with Chain here. Our opponent is going to flip up this Spy, and they don't have any more targets in deck, it looks like, so that's good. Now that we know that they're only playing the Spy package, they're not playing any guards or anything else. Unless they drew a guard in hand, which is very unlikely. They're just going to pass back to us. Mirage will not quite do it here, but we're going to fire it anyways. Just to see what we would have gotten. And maybe bluff that we actually do have something here, but our opponent can just attack him with Spy and kill us, and that is indeed what does happen. So that'll be the end of the game. I think that game could have potentially gone either way, depending on what we drew off the top there, but our opponent did have the major advantage after they were able to take our Zalug and do everything with that. So I think maybe if we had played that a little bit differently, harpying the back row just preemptively, maybe it would have turned out differently. But I think that there weren't many ways we could predict that it was Snatch Steal exactly. So I feel pretty fine about this. We're going to go into game 2. Although I do want to mention, you know, the Blast with Chain there was sort of a downside of this deck. Blast with Chain is pretty useless when you're in top deck mode, and oftentimes games in these formats will go down to top deck mode quite often. So this is a pretty good hand. As a note for the siding process, I sided out a Blast with Chain and a Fisher to bring in Sasuke Samurai and a Nobleman of Crossout. I think I realized at the very end of siding that I probably should have also sided out something like a Gemini Elf maybe for a Zambira, as Zambira can get over a Spy. But Zambira to Spy isn't like the best trade. I do side that way later in the game, or in the later match, so you may indeed see that. But for now, we're just going to summon out Gearfried, set this ring, pass back to our opponent. Our opponent's going to fire a painful choice here, sending back this Raigeki. And now they know our hand, so they can play around that a little bit. They're just going to set 3, pass back to us. We draw Injection Fairy Lily, which is pretty good. We're just going to bring out this King Tiger Wanghu, hit into their set. I think we should have actually attacked in with Wanghu instead, just to get in more damage with the Gearfried. It is a Spy here, so since Spy is mandatory, they will have to bring out a monster here. That monster will get popped by Wanghu. We're going to fire this ring on the Spy and get in for 1,700 more. This is why I think we should have just, you know, attacked with Wanghu first instead. Our opponent's going to call, but they forget that Wanghu will pop the monster, so kind of unfortunate for them. Main 2, we're just going to set 1, pass back to our opponent. And they're going to fire a Dark Hole here. Pretty bad for us. Even worse when they bring out a Spirit Reaper. They're going to attack in with the Spirit Reaper. We're going to call the Haunted back the Wang Hu. I think, honestly, I probably should have brought back the Gearfried, as that plays a little bit better with sort of Blast with Chain off the top. And also, you know, for a reason that we'll see here. We do draw Blast with Chain off the top, so again, Wang Hu was the wrong choice to bring back here. I think Gearfried would have been much better. We bring out Injection Fairy Lily, and this is when this game gets even more scuffed, because I forget that Injection Fairy Lily will be popped by Wang Hu's effect. And we realized this like the turn after. So I switched Wang Hu to defense just to, you know, play around Mirror Force. But if I hadn't done this play, then I would have just attacked in with Wang Hu, I think, for 14, then set Fiber Jar. But as is, we realized this the turn after. And yeah, so we sort of revert the game state, but I don't get in that extra damage. And I just attack into the set with Wang Hu here. It's a Witch of the Black Forest, so they'll search out a Kaiku here. And main two, we're just going to set this Fiber Jar pass back to our opponent. They're going to tribute out a Hades, which is pretty unfortunate for us. Not sure if that was off the top. Not sure if it would have actually mattered. But yeah, that will negate the Fiber Jar. We draw a Reinforcement in the army, and if we actually had Zambira in the deck here, we could have done something interesting. Searching out Zambira with Reinforcements, equipping it with Blast with Chain, hitting over their Hades. That would sort of play around something like MST in the back row. We don't think they have MST because they allowed the Call of the Haunted to go through, but if they did have it, then searching out the Zambira here would enable us to activate Blast with Chain and Damage Step to clear the Hades. So yeah, it might have been better. But as is, we're just going to go for a Gearfried here. We could also potentially tribute out the Hades here and then attack into their Hades and then equip it with Blast with Chain. I think maybe that would have been the better option because then we can Rhoda something out like Zambira next turn. So that would be pretty good. But if they've got Mirror Force, this play like kind of dies to Mirror Force. I guess the Zambira play would have also died to Mirror Force. But yeah, so, I mean, I don't know. I think we could have done things differently here. Hades is kind of a brick in hand if we don't have monsters on field for it. But we do just go for the Gearfried play here. This is more damage in my mind, so that's why I go for it. They're going to Torrential that, though, and we get majorly punished. They're going to bring out a Kaiku here, and they're going to hit in for 1800. We don't have any way to stop that with our only back row being Blast with Chain. They're going to banish 2 and then pass back to us. Now, if we had gone for the Hades play here instead, we would have had the Rhoda as follow-up to hit over the Kaiku or to pop it. I think probably Zaylu would have been the better option to search off Rhoda here, because then it would get over the Kaiku, discard a card from their hand, then we get Comfy for the other one. So I think if I had searched out, or if I had kept the Rhoda in hand and gone for the Hades play here, things would have turned out a lot differently. But as is, we are just bleeding damage at this point, and our opponent is able to get 3 cards in hand. So I feel like we would have been in a much better spot if we had done things differently. We're going to fire this Mirage, and they are going to allow that to go through, so we do draw 3. And now our opponent's just going to attack in with Kaiku here, and they're just going to banish the last monster in our grave, set 1, pass back to us. We draw Gemini Elf. We want that to stay in hand, as that would be a really good out to Kaiku that does preserve our board presence. But it looks like the Gemini Elf is the first card getting hit here, so that'll get pitched. We then lose. We lose the Harpies next, which is also kind of unfortunate, but not the worst. We want to keep 1 of Dark Hole or Pot of Greed, and this does guarantee that we'll keep 1. And that was indeed all 3 cards here, so they don't actually get the Dark Hole out of our hand. We will indeed fire the Dark Hole here. Fire a Comfy, and this may seem weird if this does drop us down to 200, but we figure we might have to do this in case they were just playing around Torrential the whole time and they've got another monster in hand. The risk is if they've got like Serpent, that would be really bad for us, and unfortunately they do have Serpent, so it doesn't matter what we do here, we just lose either way, so we'll just pitch the Serpent, and yeah, it won't matter. Let's just see what we would have drawn next turn off the Mirage, but also let's just see what they drew. It looks like they didn't really... Well, they drew an MST, so that would have deprived us of the Mirage. But yeah, they just pop our unknown back row, and that's the end of the game. Again, I think if I had played the Hades here instead, things would have gone very differently. Knowing about the Serpent, though, makes it so that maybe the pitches off the Zaylu and the Serpent would have been a bit less good. But I do think that it still would have put us in a very good situation here. And the back row was a scapegoat, so that would have also delayed us a little bit. But I think that potentially we could have won this game if we had played it a little bit differently. But, you know, the Hades here was a little bit of a brick. Again, if I had played it differently, I think it would have been a lot less of a brick, and it would have been ultimately fine. But as is... This is just how it sort of shook out. And again, this game was also incredibly scuffed. If we had brought back the Gearfried or realized that Wang would have popped the Lily, I think this would have gone a lot differently here. But that's the breaks, you know. Misplays are a part of the game, and I apologize for misplaying here, but I do think that this sort of shows that this deck can be very good, but it can also have some major problems if you brick on blasts and things like that. But this wasn't the only game we played with this deck, as this first game was kind of scuffed. So we did play another match, and I think that that was a lot more indicative of, you know, what this game will look like once you're actually skilled with the deck. So let's dive into that. Okay, we've got our next game here against Soul65. This was a direct rematch, so we're both playing the same decks here. And Soul will win the Gravekeepers yet again. So they're going to be able to go first here. And honestly, this is a pretty decent hand. So I'm pretty happy with this. Unfortunately, that Forceful will make the hand a bit less good. But we still do have a lot of aggressive pressure with our monsters here. Opponent's just going to bring in a Witch, set 4, pass. Now, they know our hands. They do know about Zalug. But it honestly isn't even the best to attack in with this Zalug here, because we won't be able to pitch whatever Witch will search. So actually what I do here is a bit interesting. I just set the Zalug pass. They don't have another monster in hand right now to get over the Zalug. If they draw one that's bad, we get Dark Hole to potentially alleviate that a little bit. But I feel ultimately okay about this. They're just going to set another pass back, or not pass back. They're going to hit in with the Zalug, and we could potentially mill here. I don't actually want to, in case they've got like called Haunted, Monster Reborn, or just a Serpent off the top. So yeah, I won't mill. We draw Snatch Steal, so we could potentially Snatch Steal the Witch and then Tribute over it for Hades. I don't really think that's good. I think that plays into too many of their traps. So yeah, we're just going to switch the Zalug to attack. You know, we won't mill or do anything like that. They will get a search here, and they will search out Kaiku, which is a bit unfortunate for us. But we can Snatch Steal that Kaiku next turn, tribute it over for Hades, and be pretty good in that respect. They're going to ring our Zalug here in draw, which is a bit worrying. I think they do this because they're afraid of Blast with Chain, and yeah, it seems like that is indeed the case. They're going to MST our back row here, which is just a Snatch Steal. So we will lose that, and you know, that is potentially unfortunate, but we would have lost that anyways to the MST, so I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. And now we draw the Blast with Chain. We're going to try and fire a Dark Hole here, but that gets met with an Imperial Order. So we're just going to bring up this Wang who set this Blast, pass back to them. They're going to think about whether to keep paying for the Order here, and they will indeed do that. They're just going to hit into the Wang who, thinking this is a bluff, or at least just trying to call it. In damage step, we do have the Blast with Chain here, so that will indeed get rid of the Kaiku. And now we've got a decent attacker here for later turns. We've got Harpies, which is pretty decent for later. We're going to hit in with the Wang Hu here. They're going to fire a Mirror Force on that. And we're just going to set the Harpies. This is a bluff. Also, MST isn't really able to be activated due to order. And I figure, you know, if they do bring out a monster to attack into our hand, at least this way we do have the Harpies here. So they're going to let the IO lapse. They've got a Graceful Charity, which is pretty good. They're going to draw 3. They're going to pitch 2. They're going to pitch Lily and Hades, which is a little bit worrying to see from us. But they've got a Pot of Greed here to draw 2 more. It's very good. They're going to set 1, pass back to us. And we're just going to fire this Harpies here. And wow, that gets rid of 2 Last Wills. Okay, that tells us a bit more about their deck. So it seems like they're on a bit more of a like tribute deck, using Gravekeepers Spy to get more bodies out on board. If you tribute a monster, then you can Last Will out something else. So that's pretty good for them. They're going to bring out another Spy, pass back to us, and they're going to tribute out a Jinzo. That's pretty bad for us here. They'll hit over the Gearfried, pass back to us, and we've got a Blast with Chain off the top. That's pretty useless into Jinzo. So they're going to fire a Cold Wave here. That doesn't matter to us like too much, but if we do draw like a board clear, that will matter. But yeah, they're going to get super aggressive here. We need a monster off the top, but there aren't really many monsters that actually do it here. So I think we might just be dead. And indeed, we just draw a Fisher, and I mean, even if Cold Wave hadn't been active, that would not have been a good draw here. So we're just going to go into game 2. And now for this game 2, I do indeed side in the Zambira as well. So basically, my siding process is I side out the Fisher, I side out one of the Blast with Chains, and then I do also side out a copy of Gemini Elf, I believe. So yeah, I think Fisher's really bad in this format, just from playing those games. Like, I get how it can be good in certain situations, and against a more recruiter-focused deck, it can definitely pull its weight, and maybe it's worth siding for that reason, but I just think it's not very good in a lot of situations. So we do take out the Fishers, and yeah, and the Hades was kind of underwhelming there as well, so that maybe is an indication that Hades isn't the best in this deck, but I do think in the previous game where Hades was underwhelming, if we had played it differently, it would have actually turned out pretty good. And it does synchronize well with like the change of hearts and the snatch heals. So yeah, I think that it's ultimately fine. But we'll have to see how this game goes. We draw a pretty broken open hand. But yeah, we're going to go for Graceful here just to see if we can draw even more broken. And look, indeed we do. We're going to discard a Wanghu and a Gearfried, and this may seem weird. Those are both very good cards here. But it's because we've got Gemini Elf and then basically a full board of spell and traps. We could have set the reinforcement as well. The reason I don't do this is because if they've got Harpies, that's still pretty bad for us, and we do want to be able to get a monster to hand in a worst case situation. But yeah, maybe I should have gotten greedy and just set the reinforcement as well, but I feel fine about this. And they're going to let us draw, so that's pretty good. And this is a busted hand as well. Wow, really good. They're going to fire Cold Wave here, and we actually have to check whether Cold Wave will shut off Mirage's discard effect. And based on our research, it does seem like it will. So we just let this go through. If it didn't, then we would have fired a MST here, chaining, and then just pop the Mirage so that we wouldn't have to discard. But yeah, as is, this is perfectly fine. We draw a Zalug. We're just going to get aggressive here, hitting into their set. Unfortunately, it's a spy, so they won't be able to have a card be discarded, which is quite unfortunate, but we're just going to pass back to them. Since we have 4 cards in hand, we won't draw anything for Mirage, and thus we won't discard anything next turn, so I feel very good about how that Cold Wave turned out there. But they're going to tribute over that spy for a Hades, fire a Raigeki on our board, and that is really rough. They're going to be able to attack in for 2450 here, which is a bit unfortunate. And then they're going to set 1 here. And because we don't need to actually pop our Mirage, we're going to pop their back row in the end phase. We accidentally reveal the Monster Reborn, which will influence our play here a little bit next turn. But actually, you know, I do think that the play we make this turn is the best play we can make. So we draw Exiled Force, and now we have a really interesting option here. We're going to go for Pot first instead of fighting Rhoda. I think I could have maybe reordered this, but we want to use Rhoda as sort of like a toolboxy option to search into what we need. So yeah, we're going to go for the pot there. We're going to think about exactly how to structure this turn, but I do think it's a pretty good way we do it. We're going to fire Duo here to just see what they've got in hand. We do see that they've got a Serpent, so they won't quite be on no resources for the next turn, which is good to know about. But yeah, we're just going to fire a Reborn here and bring back a Gearfried. Now what we're going to do is we're going to summon out this Exiled Force, Change of Heart, their Hades, attack over the Spy with the Hades, and then get in for 2800 here. And now in main phase 2, we can just pop the Hades with the Exiled Force, set this Imperial Order, set this Rhoda, set this Ring of Destruction, pass back to our opponent. We're just setting everything now. And I think that makes a lot of sense because if they draw Harpies, we've got IO. If they draw Pot to potentially draw MST and Harpies, then we've got the IO for that as well. So I feel very good about this. So in standby phase, we will draw 4 cards. They will add the Serpent to hand. And I feel extremely good about this turn of events. They're just going to set 2, pass back to us. We've got this Imperial Order here. And yeah, we're just going to let that lapse because we've got so many powerful spells. Maybe we didn't honestly need to let it lapse because we could have just summoned out Zambira, attacked them that way. As is, we're going to reinforce the army here, grabbing Sasuke Samurai. I think we could have potentially added like a Zalug instead. But this is in case like they do draw like into a Gravekeepers Spy or something like that. Also, this way we can, you know, ring whatever they bring out to hit over the Sasuke Samurai. So it's a bit of bait in that way as well. We're actually not going to set multiple cards here because we don't have an out to Mirage now, and I like our current hand as is. So I feel like this is pretty fine. Our opponent's going to set 2, pass back to us. We draw Zalug here. We could get greedy and summon that out as well, but that plays into Torrential a bit too much for my liking, so we're just going to hit in with this Sasuke Samurai here, pop their Serpent. They're going to fire Ring, target our Gearfried here. And then main phase 2, I actually make a major misplay here. I should have just summoned out Zambira and then tried to ring it. But unfortunately, I don't do that. And so we do miss lethal this turn, potentially give them a way to, you know, draw into more outs. We're going to set the Zalug for next turn. And they're going to add a Serpent here. So they're going to fire Painful Choice, which was the set there, so that's a bit of a bluff. They're going to search out a couple good ones here, but it is a really painful choice for them. I think, honestly, here we might just give them Fiber, as Sasuke does clear Fiber, and also we have other ways to actually, you know, kill them with the ring that we have here. They're going to summon out a Kaiku here, and that will just be the end of the game, though, because we're just going to fire this ring. If they've got, like, Book, then we can clear it with the Sasuke, get in for lethal damage next. Actually, we'd clear it with the Zambira, and then get in for lethal damage. But But yeah, I feel very good about this, and that will indeed be the end of the game there. So I missed lethal in a couple places at the end of that game. I think that the end of the game was very sloppy, but I do think that that does show the power of this deck, and I mean, well, honestly, it probably shows the power of Mirage of Nightmare. But, this deck was able to take advantage of that. And I do like the sort of way that we sided here. So we will go into game 3 here, keeping the side deck, largely the same. And, yeah, this is a pretty great opener. Unfortunately, our opponent is going first. They might hand rip this. They have Cold Wave, which is another, pretty good thing for them to do here. They bring out Kaiku, which is a very strong card, but luckily our top decked Gemini Elf will be able to clear it. So I feel pretty good about this. Unfortunately, we couldn't set up the Gearfried Blast with Chain sort of thing here. And this is a little bit worrying. If they do have like hand control stuff now, then they can just rip apart our hand. Luckily, it doesn't look like they do. They're just going to bring out a Lily here, get over our Elf, and then set one pass back to us. We draw Forceful Sentry here. We're going to Forceful and just see what they've got. And we see that they have a Torrential, Change of Heart, and Dark Ruler Hades. I think we do just need to take the Torrential, as that is a bit busted. Or not Torrential, I mean Change. Because that's just, such a good card. I mean, it can really deal with our board quite well. And it can also fuel the Hades here. So I think we have to take that. We've got MST for the Torrential later, but we can also just play around Torrential later. Because we are just going to fire the MST now in case the set is an MST. It was just a last will, so I feel pretty good about that. And, I think I make a major misplay here. I think I should have just summoned out Gearfried and then set Blast with Chain, as that sets us up with a pop. We don't have to play in Torrential, etc. But I set the Witch here instead, and I think this was a major flaw. The reason I set the Witch was I wanted to get them to sort of pay more with the Injection Fairy Lily if they attacked in. And also, if they tribute out Hades for this, then we can pop the Hades instead with the Gearfried. But yeah, I think this was a little bit greedy on my part and really a bad play. So our opponent is going to tribute out for a Hades that will negate our Witch. And yeah, this is why it was such a bad play here. They're going to set one Fire Mirage, and that will indeed get them back into this game. I mean, yeah, I think if we had played this completely differently, then yeah, we could have potentially been in a much better spot here. They would have still had the Mirage and the Torrential, but we would have had an offensive pressure on board, just getting in every turn. So I think it would have been pretty good. We're going to bring out that Hades, and they're just going to let that go through. So it looks like they don't want to fire the Torrential yet in case we're bluffing. We're going to set this Knock as well, just to sort of bait out Spell and Trap removal if they've got it. But they're probably going to spend that on a Mirage if they've got it. So they are going to just go to standby phase, so it looks like they don't have the out to Mirage. So we're just going to let them keep this one closest to the extra deck here. And they're going to pitch 4 good ones. So I feel pretty good about that. They're going to think about exactly what to do. They're just going to bring out this Hades, attack into the Gearfried. We've got the Blast with Chain for that, so that will pop the Dark Ruler there. They've got an Exiled Force here to pop our Gearfried, though, and that's pretty good. They're going to draw 4 here with the Mirage. And we do know about the Torrential, so let's just trade. We're going to bring out this Zalug. That will get popped by TT. And it looks like they do not have an out to Mirage here. So we're just going to pick the one close to the extra deck again, because why not? They pitched 2 Hades, which honestly they're probably fine with getting that out of hand. And they also pitch a Spirit Reaper and Forceful. So I feel very good about the Spirit Reaper and Forceful getting sent. They're just going to pass back to us, so maybe that other monster in hand is a tribute monster as well. They're going to draw 3 here, so a bit less to discard next turn. They unfortunately draw another one on top of this, but we can just rectify this by having them not draw next turn. So we bring out a Wanghu, just hit in here for 17, and then we'll just pass back to them. They are going to fire the MST on their Mirage, so, they had to draw it eventually, and they did. They fire a Dark Hole here, set 2, pass back to us. We can just Nobleman the set, so I feel good about that. We're going to bring out a Zambira in case they do have TT and want to sort of use it here, but it looks like they don't, so yeah, we're just going to fire Nobleman. And we hit a Serpent, so I feel very good about that. Unfortunately, Zambira cannot get in for damage. And this is another reason why I'm not the biggest fan of Zambira. Because your deck wants to be getting aggressive, and Zambira does not enable you to do that. So it can get over 1 Spy, which is nice, but I think overall it's not really worth playing Zambira. So we're going to bring out this Lily. We're going to switch the Zambira to defense to play around Mirror Force here. But unfortunately, they've got Ring, so, that will be what it is. But if they bring out a monster to hit over Zambira here, I still feel pretty good because we got Change of Heart. They're going to summon out a Witch, and that will indeed get over the Zambira. So that'll pop that. They'll set 1, pass back to us. Call the Han is pretty good. We'll set that, pass back to them. They're going to bring out a Cold Wave, and I think we are just going to chain the Call of the Haunted to the Cold Wave here to bring in a monster from Grave. And we're going to target that Gemini Elf just as a big beater. Unfortunately, they do have the MST for that, so that will get popped. They're going to bring out a Jinzo on top of it, search out a Yata, which is really unfortunate. This might just be the end of the game, depending on our top deck here. So we're going to take 24, and we draw Rhoda, which is pretty great here, but under Cold Wave, you can't fire anything here. But we could potentially win the game next turn, depending on if they've got back row. They're going to bring out Yata attack in for 2,600. And if they don't have anything else, then I think we do win, because we reinforcement out a monster with 1,400 more attack, fire change of heart, and then we just win the game. Even if they do have back row, there isn't really much that can really help them here. If they've got Scapegoat, they can potentially, stave off death here. But they'll also have locked their board, so they won't be able to bring out Yata next turn. So I feel ultimately pretty good about this, but it looks like they don't have anything here. Oh yeah, no, we didn't know the next card was Servant. It was just a Call of the Haunted. Okay, so I feel very good about that. We don't draw here, but we don't need to. We've got reinforced from the army. We'll search out Don Zalu just to make it exact. And yeah, we're just going to hit in here. 14 plus 24. And off the Zalug, we also do just pitch a Yata, which is very funny. But that will indeed be the end of the game. So I think that was a pretty good showing for the deck. And, I do think the deck has some flaws, though, because I really felt like a lot of the time we were sort of like on the edge of losing in a lot of different places. Again, I did misplay a couple times, which is definitely my own fault. And, maybe if I hadn't misplayed, I would have felt a lot better about these games. But I do feel like Hand Control is just a generally more powerful deck because it is just more generally good. Like, you're playing cards that don't necessarily need other cards to work well. Like, Blast with Chains are really bricky if you don't have the monsters to go with them. And ideally in this deck, you'll always have the monsters to go with them, but it doesn't quite always work out that way. And I think that you really saw that here. And with the Yata Lock being so prevalent in this format, that can really be a bad thing. But what do you all think about the deck? Do you think that it's a lot better than making it out to be, and that, if I had practiced with it a little bit more, it would have done a better showing? Or do you think that, it actually is pretty bad, and that I'm actually making it seem better than it actually is? Let me know down in the comments below. I look forward to hearing your feedback as always. And of course, if you do like this content, please be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out quite a bit. We're so close to 800 subscribers, so with your help, we can actually make it there. But until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.